Over 70% of single women identify as Democrat compared to only 45% of married women. The number of single women in the US has increased 55% since 2000,
Whoa, whoa, hold on. Okay.
reaching 43 million in 2023.
That is huge.
Women in society historically, they would rely on a partner to help care for them and to help care
Mhm.
for their kids.
Oh, and
And
now
when
it's
you
the state.
Yeah, and when you disintermediate the family unit, you can use the state both to decrease the BATNA of a woman to not have a partner, while also acting as the caregiver. Like, these women are sort of like nuns to the state. They're basically married to the state. Um,
Wow. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Nuns to the state. That is.
and I'd also note that this trend could explain, for example, why Black females overwhelmingly vote Democrat so much. Because when you look at the number of single women, 47% of Black adults are single compared to 28% of not white adults and
uh
27% of Hispanic adults.
I wish we could see information on the extent to which single women are getting government services.
The number was larger than I thought. 90% of welfare recipients are single women.
Would you like to know more?
Hello, Simone. I am excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be talking about why single cat ladies are overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris.
But they're not all cat ladies, are they?
She'll become a crazy cat lady. She only has one cat. Give her time.
I think it is easy to underestimate, one, how heavily Kamala is leading with single women, and two, how much Democrats have worked to increase the number of single women and how much that number has increased over the last few election cycles to give them better margins towards victory. Which
Wait,
is
just with single women? So even now, more single women than before are voting for Democrats?
no. They have created new single women
Oh,
to increase the majority. People are worried about them shipping in voters. They are creating a demographic of voters by making a portion of women intolerable to date, which
smart.
increases it's very smart. So we'll go over this whole thing. Single women are actually the only major demographic where Kamala and Democrats are still actually winning, which is what's really interesting. If you look at it's wild now.
So this whole turning immigrants into leftist voters conspiracy theory has nothing on the single
Well,
women
no. I mean, if
conspiracy
you
theory.
look at married men, if you look at unmarried men, if you look at single women, if you look at married women, the only category where Kamala wins is single women.
Wow.
So let's go into this. Now, obviously, a lot of this was started with JD Vance's cat lady comment, which is why I joked on that to begin with. Specifically, he said, a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And a lot of people took that really negatively because a lot of women framed that as personal attacks against themselves.
They call her the cat lady. People say she's crazy just because she has a few dozen cats. But can anyone who loves animals that much really be crazy?
Whereas I understand his sentiment here. Obviously, what he means by this is if you don't have a personal stake in the future of the country, you are going to make decisions which don't consider the future of the country, which is something we've repeatedly seen about the exploding amount of debt, the way people are handling things like Social Security, and obviously unsustainable manners. Nothing about the way the government is run right now. And I'd say both parties are to blame for this to an extent. Has the long-term future of the country in mind anymore.
Yes, the government is excessively short-termist.
But I thought it was also interesting how like Democrat mainstays reacted to JD Vance's comment. Specifically, Taylor Swift attempted to flip the language on the head, signing off her endorsement of Kamala Harris with quote unquote childless cat lady, besides a photo of Swift and her cat. Her cat's name is Benjamin Button. Meghan Kane said in a social media post that the comment displayed an quote insensitivity and cruelty to women, end quote. Would you say that that comment was in any way cruel to women, or
No.
I mean, the cruelty is to women, and we'll do a whole other episode on this, who use cats to masturbate their parenting instinct. When I say masturbate, I mean that in a very literal sense, in the same way that sex is designed to attempt to get us to procreate and rear the next generation. Women also have these instincts that are designed to want babies so that they want the next generation. And they masturbate these instincts through, instead of childbirth, caring for small pets. Um, which satiates them enough that they do not, I mean, satiates them temporarily. We all know that's why they keep getting more, because that that's the way this works. Is you think that you have satiated this instinct, but you haven't. So you get more and more and more until you've got 20 cats and you're sad and alone and fall asleep to the sound of your own scream.
I want to be a lawyer and a doctor because a woman can do anything.
At 24, Eleanor had graduated from Harvard Medical and Yale Law.
I'm a little burnt out. So sometimes, don't shoot me, I have a glass of wine with Buster here. He's a real comfort. I might even get a second cat.
Any thoughts before I go further, Simone?
It is insulting to insinuate that all childless cat women are miserable with their lives, because not all are. I don't think Taylor Swift is miserable.
I'm guessing that Simone made this assumption thinking that if she was as wealthy and famous and respected as Taylor Swift, that she would not be unhappy. But if you actually look at Taylor Swift's songs, first, many of them are pining after having a guy who loves and cares for her, which she doesn't. And that's part of what her sadness comes from. But also you can look at her songs that specifically talk about it, like the song Anti-Hero, which has the lines, "When my depression works the graveyard shift," talking about, well, being depressed. And she, in the song Labyrinth, talks about how her breakups trigger depressive episodes. And if you look at public statements in interviews like Miss Americana, the 2020 Netflix documentary, she alludes to fame making her fundamentally unhappy, which it doesn't need to. I mean, Simone and I have gathered a great deal of fame. Just today, another article in The Guardian came out about us. And I guess it's presumably attacking us, but they also published a slide deck we did on how to make new forms of government, which got me really excited. And I guess you can choose how you react to the things around you. And single cat ladies choose to react to it in self-indulgent ways, like Taylor Swift does.
For example, I don't think some of our friends who are childless and cat owners are miserable. But in general, if I were childless and I owned cats, I wouldn't be hurt by this. It's a joke.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it also shows sort of a victim culture on the left of, like, you know, he made fun of childless cat ladies, therefore, although, you know,
Well, they call parents breeders. I mean, just whatever.
if you
Who
have a
cares?
huge amount of cognitive, yeah, I've never taken offense to that, but like, it's like, it's an attempt to dehumanize your opponents, and I get that, but like, childless cat ladies is a bit different. It's not like really dehumanization, it's characterization along a stereotype,
Oh, it's
which
not
is more like prejudice.
dehumanization, because he talks about how they're miserable with their lives, which I think many of them would argue is important, because mental health is a major interest also of many single cat ladies. So I think many of them would tell their therapists that they're miserable with their lives. It's not an inaccurate characterization even.
Yeah. All right, so let's go over the stats. Single women now make up 25% of the electorate. In recent polls, Harris was leading among single women by nearly 40 points. Over 70% of single women identify as Democrat or lean Democrat, compared to only 45% of married women.
But to
So
what
it's-
extent do you think this is because they just identify with her, a fellow biologically childless career woman?
This was the large extent true when Biden was running, so it's not an identification
okay.
with her.
Okay.
It's gotten more extreme recently, but no, it's the Democrats have always disproportionately appealed to the single vote. I really want to highlight this because I think it's a critical thing to note. 45%, only 45% of married women support Democrats. 70% of single women do.
That's
And you could say, well, maybe it's that Democrats don't get married, but actually you typically see a change in women after they get married. And this brings me to something that you brought up earlier that I thought was really powerful, is that a lot of older people are like, oh, well, my daughter is young, and so she's still a Democrat, but when she gets older, she'll become a Republican. And you were pointing out, no, she won't. Like, that used to be the case, but your daughter isn't married. And it's like, when did you become a Republican? You know, to the women who say this. And it's like, well, after I got married. And it's like, yeah, well, your daughter isn't getting married and has no ability to get married right now, given the way that she views the world and the way she views the opposite gender.
Well, and even just given the way that relationship markets work, there are so many single women we know who want to be married and just can't be married because they're high achieving women. And it's very, very difficult for them to find uncoupled, non completely weird or ruined in some way, single men who are higher achieving than them.
Yeah. Hypothesis question, Simone. Why do you believe that when women get married, they become more Republican? I mean, you did.
To a great extent, you allowed me to understand that I was permitted to have non-hyper progressive beliefs. And I did basically grow up in a cultural cult where I just thought that there were certain things you weren't allowed to think or believe.
So basically you're saying it's communalism.
It could be that. And I think there's also some element of when you become very close with your partner, you start to identify with them and see the world through them. And I think that seeing, especially in this modern environment, seeing the world through a man's eyes can cause you to become pretty black-pilled to progressivism in general.
Yeah, well, I think that the movement, and I think this is probably the bigger thing, is that typically when people are married, they begin to see themselves as a combined identity. And
Yeah.
also many of these women, once they're married, have sons. And I
Mhm.
think when you see how genuinely cruel and sadistic the existing urban monoculture and progressive party is to men, and
Yeah.
how much it dehumanizes men, as we pointed out in our Bears video, right? Where if you said this about any other group, when women were like, oh my God, like, I'd rather be in the woods with a bear than a man. And I then put into it like a black man. I'd rather be in the woods with a bear than a random black man. And you're like, oh my God, that is super racist. Like, what? How could you, black?
Man is scary.
With a bear.
What I've heard about bears, they don't always attack you, right? So maybe a bear.
Probably a bear.
Oh, 100% a bear, which is like terrifying to say, but
Definitely a bear. Some
Black.
men are very scary out there. A bear.
Even some men are saying bear, although we could predict that this man's opinion will be whatever makes women approve of him.
If I were alone in the woods, would you rather me encounter a bear or a
Black.
man?
I feel more like bear. I don't know, because I feel like I would know what the outcome would be with a bear.
But the things that you're saying, you're like, oh my God, this is an incredible level of prejudice that if it was under any other guise, you would see it. And I think that women, until they identify seriously as a man to some extent, they don't see how anti-male and how bigoted the mainstream progressive forces are. And I think that once they have a son or something like that, they wake up and they're like, oh my God, like all his real opportunities in life are taken away. He's going to have trouble, getting a job. He's going to have trouble.
And it's just a lot easier to dehumanize men in general when you don't relate to them much at all in life.
No, I think you're absolutely right about this. And I think it's also that when people get married, they form a combined identity to an extent. And they stop, for example, for me, I don't identify as my own gender that much anymore. And I think that this is actually really similar to, if you go back to, let's say, the 60s or 70s, where sometimes men would get married and then they'd be like, now I see how harshly our society has been treating women. And they'd become more interested in women's issues. I think we're seeing the opposite now, because I think anyone who is actually neutral on this sees that overwhelmingly our society is anti-male at this point.
Yes.
So I'm going to go further with stats here. The number of single women in the US has increased 55% since 2000.
Whoa, hold on. Okay.
Reaching 43 million in 2023.
That is huge. But I guess that's just another angle of all the dismal dating and sex stats we've seen.
Well, I mean, the 55% growth that they've grown by more than half since 2000. I think something that we can forget is that in the same way the left might be motivated for immigrants to come into specific districts to vote, they would be even more motivated. So to be clear, among single women, they get a larger share of the vote than they do among recent immigrants, like first generation immigrants. They do better off to break women up. And I will note, single men also vote more democratically, which we'll get to in a second.
Well, this makes a lot of sense to me too, because in general, when it comes to government handouts, which typically come to be more supported or more widespread under Democratic leadership, women are the biggest beneficiaries by far. Single women especially. They're the ones who get the most in terms of food stamps and payouts and services and healthcare.
Yeah.
When you look at what social services are provided on a state or federal level. So that also kind of makes sense because in terms, like, even more than immigrants, it's single women who get the most.
Well, one theory that I have heard banted about is that women in society historically, they would rely on a partner to help care for them and to help care for their kids.
Oh, and now
when
it's
you-
the state.
Yeah, and when you disintermediate the family unit, you can use the state both to make it lower cost, like decrease the BATNA of a woman to not have a partner, while also acting as the caregiver. Like, these women are sort of like nuns to the state. They're basically married to the state.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Nuns to the state. That is.
And I'd also note that this trend could explain, for example, why Black females overwhelmingly vote Democrat so much. Because when you look at the number of single women, 47% of Black adults are single compared to 28% of not white adults and 27% of Hispanic adults. And here I would note, if you're talking about like, oh, born out of wedlock and everything like that, Hispanics have a higher marriage rate than whites. If you're like anti-immigrant or something like that.
Well, it's a more conservative culture, especially when it comes to things like marriage and having kids.
I wouldn't just say more because they have stronger family units right now.
Sure. Yeah, that too.
So
wow.
Another fun thing you can see, I think part of this is progressivism has made women undateable and unmarriable, like the modern iteration of it. If you watch that video about like the woman who is in the Star Wars show twerking about how oppressed she is, like who would want to marry that? As we've talked about in our video about Black men and how hard it is for them to find partners. This is a zombification of Black culture video where they used to be an even more conservative culture than white culture in terms of like family values, where they had half the number of children born out of wedlock as white culture. And this was as recently as the 60s. And now obviously it's astronomically more. But if we talk about like, where is this degradation coming from? And we'll get some, like, actually in this episode, some better understanding of how they corrupted Black culture, which I think is really interesting. But the number of women in gender studies degrees has increased 300% since the 1990s.
Oh, who needs that? Where is the demand for this?
That's
Where
like
is
a
the gender studies
degree.
industry? Do they go to the gender studies factory to produce gender studies?
Well, here's the thing. I imagine, no, they go work for these bureaucracies, which hire them to like be the thought police at companies. And that's literally what they're getting a degree in, is thought policing.
Oh boy.
And a lot of companies, as we pointed out, the way companies end up going woke is they are like, okay, we need to put a few token whatevers in our company. Let's put them somewhere where they don't need to actually do anything so they can't damage stuff. And then they put them in HR, and then they end up filtering for everyone else, and they end up corrupting the entire company super quickly. And this has been a repeated phenomenon in companies. And if you're going to clean up a company, you have to start with HR.
Yeah.
HR could be completely unwoked. Anyone who is there other than on merit needs to be removed. And this is measurable merit in terms of who they're hiring, the output those people are showing, etc. Now, an analysis last year from Pew Research Center found that 1/4 of all 40-year-olds in 2021 had never been married. All right, single women. So let's talk about single women as a demographic. Single women are older, more educated, and more financially independent than they were a generation earlier. And they are more motivated to vote. In 2000, 48% of single women reported voting. In 2020, that jumped to 61%. According to the data firm Catalyst, single women now make up 1/4 of the electorate. Single men, on the other hand, make up only 19%. So single men vote at dramatically lower rates than single women. So not only are there more single women, but they're voting at a higher rate. 48% in 2000 to 61% in 2020.
Wow.
And here I'm going to put on screen a graph here that shows this over time. So you can see the proportion of eligible single women and single male voters who showed up.
Oh, so civic engagement for single women is going up.
Yes.
I wish we could see information on, I don't know how I would measure this, the extent to which single women in the US are also getting government services, like, or benefiting from.
I'll look it up in post. The number was larger than I thought. 90% of welfare recipients are single women. That's an interesting thing. And I'd also point out here that I think that this partially, when you think about these women as fundamentally being married to the state, this one explains the increase in civil engagement, but it also explains the freak out when somebody like Trump is elected.
Yes. Yeah.
Because to them, now this thing that was like their source of like care and like their essentially partner
Has
has been
become
replaced,
hostile.
yeah, with something that they see as fundamentally hostile to them.
That's fascinating.
Now, here's a really interesting poll that I'll go over, but also put on the screen here. When Harris took over the ticket, her support among single women swelled. In June, before she became the Democratic nominee, less than half of single women in a YouGov poll reported a favorable impression of her. By September, this jumped to nearly 2/3, and her support is growing. A recent Ipsos survey found Harris leading among single women voters by nearly 40 points. So she went from less than half supporting her to 70% supporting her.
Gotta thank Charlie SDX for at least 30% of that shift, I would say.
Who is
She was
Charlie?
made cool.
The Brat Summer one?
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, single women are very vibes-based voters. You know, they are not exactly. Here's another interesting stat that was shown here. Among married women, only so remember, less than half, 45% of single women supported Kamala before she was on the ticket. 35% of married women had a favorable impression of her, so very low. And then at the peak of married women having a favorable opinion of her, that was August, and it was still well below 40%.
Wow.
So,
Okay, that's very interesting. So suddenly single women started really identifying with Kamala, and yet married women didn't
well,
really
and with married women, it's now
impression.
since August into September, it's gone down again.
Wow.
So she only has, hovering around maybe like 36, 37% compared to what was around 34% before she was running. So
How
it's
curious.
interesting, like this whole Kamala remediation campaign to like remediate her public image, it seems to have been incredibly effective among single women, basically fizzled among married women. Their impression of her now is not that different than their impression of her before she ran, which I find really fascinating.
Yes. Wow. There's definitely something there. I need to think more about what that could be. Because also the funny thing is Kamala is married. Kamala has stepchildren. It's not like she should be some single woman icon. But definitely the Brat Summer association is more of an unhinged, messy single woman mood. And single women certainly appreciate more the sorts of government handouts and services that I think.
Well, I also think that they're more likely to vote with the crowd because they feel less protected than married women. I think the communalist instinct in women might be louder when they feel that they don't have a caregiver. Because in those instances, they're more vulnerable.
Or there is not another very, very strong attenuating influence in their lives that might temper their thoughts on things. So when they see something in the news or media or someone they admire say something, there isn't some partner or friend next to them being like, I don't know, like poking holes in the arguments, essentially.
Yeah. All right. Well, here is another poll. Single women overwhelmingly support Kamala Harris. And this is showing Trump, Harris refused. So when you have married women, it's 46 to 46 in this particular poll. So exactly equal. Married men, it's 55% Trump to 42% Kamala. Never married women, it is 65% Harris, 28% Trump. And in this particular poll, never married men actually support Harris more than Trump, 51% to 41%. But I've seen the opposite in other polls. So this is fascinating. So Democrats hugely benefit from breaking up marriages. Hugely. Now, we're going to talk about some other interesting things here. So in a Gallup 2020 survey, 21% of single women said they could not support a candidate who did not share their views on abortion. This year, that jumped to 35%. The General Social Survey has found that Americans across the board have become increasingly supportive of access to abortion in any circumstance. But the shift among single women has been especially dramatic. In its 2022 survey, 2/3 of single women said that abortion should be available for any reason, a view held by less than half of single women a decade earlier. So our country is becoming more pro-abortion, and I think that this is one of those things where you have not seen this same insane rise in Europe, and I think that a lot of this is downstream, as we've talked about in other episodes, of the view that life begins at conception, which, by the way, is not a biblical view. The Bible very clearly says life begins before conception. It's something that the Catholic Church made up about 200 years ago with Pope Pius IX, and then was chosen by the Republican Party. The Republican Party used to be actually the pro-choice party in the 70s. The Republican National Convention, they were more pro-choice than anti-choice, but they choose to accept it to try to bring Catholics over, and it didn't even work. Catholics still vote overwhelmingly Democrat. So I don't know why we keep it as a position. It's not a Protestant position. It's not a Christian position. It's a one that the Pope who did the Great Castration came up with. You know, all the
I don't know. I get the impression that many American Protestants are anti-abortion now, mostly because the Republican Party went anti-abortion.
Yeah, I see that. Like they are unaware. Like they think it's a Christian thing or like an ancient Catholic thing, and it's like not. Like, as we point out, St. Augustus didn't think this. Thomas Aquinas didn't think this. Like no great Catholic thinker in history have thought this.
Yeah, I definitely get that because we've met quite a few Protestants who are very suspicious of abortion, even hormonal birth control. And
before a nervous system has developed, which to me is just, but it's ended up destroying, I think, the Republicans' ability to earn ground share on this, and things are moving further and further in the opposite direction, which is leading to more and more abortions, which is like you're functionally like, do you want to like win? Do you want to lower the amount of abortions, or are you okay with so that you can masturbate to this aesthetic view towards abortion, continue losing?
Yeah, this purist view of life begins exactly at conception instead of a more moderated view of, hey, you know, it looks like, you know, you're looking at killing a human regardless, but we see it as killing a human when you decide not to have kids. So, you know, where you start is arbitrary. I think when it really matters that you're killing a human is when you start killing a human that will feel pain as you kill them. And then you need to look at it very differently. And that's it. If we started looking at it at 12 to 15 weeks as, hey, let's put severe controls on this, so many abortions could be managed very differently. And we could probably have far fewer abortions, as you point out.
And you've pointed this out with people calling you, like Republicans will call you and be like, I want you to have a, you know, life being at the conception stance. And you're like, well, my stance would dramatically, one, it's more likely to pass. Two, it would lower the number of abortions when contrasted with the person I'm running against. And they're like, no, if you won't take this stance, I'm voting for your opponent.
Yeah, meaning that they're voting for
more
roughly more abortions. Yeah, it's just, I think that demonstrates how illogical and virtue signaling.
Yeah, no, it's about virtue signaling for them. They don't actually care about the children, or they would do what would help.
Apparently not. Yeah, because if you did, you would be very focused on anything that gets you marginally closer to your preferences. And even if your preferences are absolutely zero abortions ever, you would still want to vote for me, even though I only care about controls after week 12.
Now, I'd also note, and this is important to note around all this, when people are like, well, you know, Trump and his abortion. Trump has said that if elected, he would veto a national abortion ban. Veto, not support. He would veto one. So to go further here with stats, for most of the past 2 decades, women felt largely content with their treatment in the US. That all changed after Trump's election and the #MeToo movement. Less than half of women in 2021's Gallup survey said they felt satisfied about the way they were treated in American society, a historic low. Single women were the least satisfied. And
Isn't that so funny that after supposed corrections to, you know, maltreatment against women started feeling worse when supposedly this mistreatment was happening unrecognized and unpunished, that women were happier.
Well, I mean, this is something you see across the board. As women get rights, they become less happy. I'll put a graph here that shows that in the mid-1970s, women were significantly more happy than men, and that women's happiness went down over time as they got more rights through the 80s into the 90s. And then by the early 90s, women net were unhappy with their lives.
I think this is largely what Phyllis Schlafly was famous for arguing, basically saying, why are you making us work? We don't want to work. We have it good here.
Well, and now these women are well, keep in mind, even in the 70s, the majority of women worked, Simone, or when this trend started. I don't think that that's what this is in relation to. I think it's in relation to vested interest among Democrats for women to be unhappy and feel like they are victims. And I think
Same thing they did with Black culture.
Yes. And so you actually see here, by the 2000s and mid 90s, women were net less happy with their lives than men. And that's been persistent since then. And it went up again dramatically, or I guess you should say down again dramatically with Me Too, and has stayed down since then, where women, especially single women, just feel very disempowered, even if it is functionally not true.
Right.
And here I want to talk about more recent statistics. So one statistic I found really interesting was the anxiety, what was it? US-based mental health days for female and male differential, 1993 to 2021. And you can just see it shooting up specifically after 2019. After 2019, women's mental health absolutely explodes.
What do you think happened in 2019?
I think that this is when wokeism really began to take over mainstream culture, and many women begin to identify with this is when the wokes basically won. I mean, and I think that the Black Lives Matter thing was like the victory lap. And
I think there's something more subtle too. I think this is when you saw much more pervasive use of remote therapy services, both through programs like BetterHelp, but also, which is private pay, and through health insurance providers. So you don't administer our family's health insurance. You don't see this. But starting in 2019, our health insurance provider started offering free mental health counseling as part of its benefit. And it's not just our mental health. It's not just our health insurance provider, which is United Healthcare. Aetna, which I also was on for a period in 2020, did the same, or 2021. And I had never seen that before. And it was interesting to see that just as part of your default coverage, that you'd be getting mental health services. So I think another issue is that more people than ever were getting therapy. And as we've discussed in countless other episodes, therapists who manage to stay in business to a great extent are those which seem to help people magnify their problems and not resolve them, because of course those are the ones that keep recurring business and don't lose their clients. And I think that may have something to do with it as well.
I think we might be onto something here. I think that these could be incredibly toxic because they help spread.
But it's an industry shift. Like, it's about this availability of a product that is quite toxic. But
we've also talked about the idea of therapists being the missionaries of the urban monoculture.
That's true. They are vectors that spread it. So they go hand in hand. Yeah.
So if you're a Catholic and you sinned, you go to your priest, right? Whereas if you are dealing with something as a far progressive or urban monoculture devotee, you go to your therapist and you go, oh, I have had this sinful thought. How do I, repeat whatever? How do I indulge further is basically not how do I repent? How do I indulge even more in this sinful thought without feeling bad about it? That's really what you go to so many of these, when I see people go to their therapists, they're like, I've done this horrible thing. Can you help me not feel bad about it?
Or can you help me build a narrative about it that helps me identify with it personally? Like, this was something that happened to me when I was a child. I was traumatized. Now I'm going to live my entire life as this hero's journey narrative, attempting to overcome this great slight done to me as a child by my parents.
I disagree. I think that this is put on them by the therapist, because what they're really going to these mental health sessions for is for somebody to tell them it's not their fault.
Oh, forgive me, dearie, please. It wasn't my fault.
Not your fault. Tell me, Marius, how was it not your fault?
No, but that's what I'm saying, is it is put on them by the therapist, but the therapist is helping them weave a narrative that turns their mental problem into their identity.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But they don't go to a therapist saying this horrible thing happened to me in childhood.
No, the therapist makes that up. The therapist is like, let's now talk about your childhood.
They go to the therapist and say, here's this horrible thing I did to my friends, or here's this horrible thing I did to my kids, or here's this horrible thing I did to whoever. Why is it not my fault? That is the role that therapists have taken on, instead of help me repent, I've done this horrible thing, which is very compelling to convert into, because it removes a lot of personal responsibility. I'd also note here that, we would be remiss to not point out that the possibility of electing the first female president is important to 60% of single women voters. What's interesting is it's not that important to married women voters.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because, again, as we discussed earlier, married women aren't necessarily just defining themselves as me, woman, anymore. It's me, family at that point, or at least me and my husband.
Yeah. Have we had a female vice president yet? I feel, oh yeah, Kamala.
No. Oh yeah.
I guess I just don't think of her as a woman. Like, that's one of the weird things about it. She doesn't like really give feminine energy. She gives more like mindless bureaucratic drone energy.
I feel that way about most politicians, so I don't know.
Well, I mean,
because Sarah Palin really came off as feminine. Who else? What are other female? Yeah, there are plenty of female candidates who come off as feminine. So never mind.
Yeah, I mean, even Hillary, she came off as bitchy and conniving, but she came off as feminine nonetheless.
Yeah, she had mom energy.
She had mom energy. Yeah, and I'd say AOC comes off as pretty feminine.
Yeah,
I'd say most of the other, but Kamala just doesn't have an ounce of femininity in terms of her energy, and I think it's because
I
she
don't know
is
that the laugh, the smiling, the evasive answers all feel very feminine to me.
I love you're relying on negative stereotypes of women to build this caricature.
What smiling is not negative. Smiling is and laughing is not negative. It's joy. It was the one thing that got Kamala a huge surge in polling was this whole just the first attempt at just vibes and no substance, which was all joy and laughter and happiness. Those are great attributes for her, and it certainly helped her. It's the one thing that has helped her.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of Kamala's laugh at the ad that we've done. Remember where you could buy food when you could buy food, and it's Kamala laughing. By the way, Simone, I was actually really confused by the Scott Alexander promotion of Kamala because it looked genuine when I read it, and yet he cited like David Duke supporting her and like Curtis Yarvin when Curtis Yarvin was clearly doing it as a joke, and David Duke was obviously doing it so other people wouldn't support her. Like, I wonder if he was signaling that he meant it as a joke. Because David Duke, he must know David Duke isn't actually supporting Kamala. He's doing it to try to taint her reputation.
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it was an earnest endorsement of Kamala Harris. That's what I read.
I will cite the people who he cited. Hold on really quickly.
Yeah, and Nick Fuentes he cited. Yeah, no, he cited, I think Nick Fuentes, I don't know if Nick Fuentes is earnestly endorsing Kamala. I really don't know. But while that paragraph was a little bit confusing and maybe a little bit of a flippant joke, I do think the rest of his arguments were very earnest.
So he said Richard Spencer, David Duke, Nick Fuentes, and Curtis Yarvin. Now, I know Curtis Yarvin because I was just talking with him 2 days ago about this, was joking. Sorry, we just got back from Hereticon and had a lot of fun with Curtis is actually a really fun guy. I consider him a friend. By the way, he's looking pretty fit these days.
He's looking very good, yeah.
Did you notice, like, he used to be bigger, right? Like, it's not just me?
I'm not really good at remembering or noticing these things, but he looked great at Hereticon, yeah.
Yeah, it looked great. But so Curtis Yarvin,
his son is so cute.
I don't know Nick Fuentes, Richard. I actually beef with Nick Fuentes in some of the things I've written. So like I strongly disagree with. Well, specifically, I very obviously, given my push towards pluralism, have a problem with what's it called? Catholic integralism, which is Nick Fuentes' like core political.
Well, he's
position.
Also anti-immigration, right? And you're super pro.
I'm pro skilled
immigration.
Anti unskilled immigration. Richard Spencer, obviously, I don't know. Come on, he can't say heterodox thinkers like Curtis Yarvin, Nick Fuentes, Richard Spencer, David Duke. Does he think that they really support her?
It could be. I don't get the impression, and I think he even read about this in his post, that he's not very politically involved, and he doesn't really like writing about this. But he feels a civic responsibility to make comments and to use his platform for good. And he genuinely doesn't think that Donald Trump is the best candidate for some valid reasons. He's some valid concerns, especially if you don't know a lot of the background.
Yeah.
There's additional
No, I have
color
no
that I think
problem
if
with
he
him
did
taking
know,
this
he
position.
would be more in favor of Trump. But given how skewed most information people have available about Trump is, I don't blame him, especially if he's not interested in this stuff and he's not super tapped in. And also keep in mind, he lives in the heart of a very, very progressive area. So his availability to anything that isn't super biased is like,
No, sorry. I'm not saying I don't have any problem with this. This is I would expect him to support Kamala. Like that would be like, what's he gonna do, right? Like he basically got a gun to his head from all directions, given where he lives.
What are you finger painting?
A bear?
Ein bear? And bear has nothing to do with accepting people of different races.
I didn't know what else to paint.
Start on you. Go. Faster. 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 Are you done? What is it? What have you done?
People of all colors and creeds holding hands beneath a rainbow.
Good. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now do it again.
He doesn't exactly have a choice in the matter. But
out of the Bay Area. Yeah.
But the thing I found interesting was how he does it. Like I can't tell if he's trying to underhandedly signal, no, I don't actually support her, but I'm going to make it.
No, because his arguments are too
logical,
earnest, and even his counter arguments, where he's like, "Here's one, like my best steel
that's
man."
what I took. Like there was all the arguments and counter arguments, and then he's like Curtis Yarvin, David Duke. Nick
I know
Fuentes.
that. I'm just assuming that he doesn't read deeply on that.
Yeah. That's actually almost like endearingly cute that like he sees this and he's like, yeah, they all genuinely support her and aren't doing it to try to poison her by attaching their known toxic reputations to her. Anyway, I found that really fun. So any final thoughts, Simone?
You have fundamentally shifted once again. I love you so much. I love our conversations. You fundamentally shifted the way that I view married women in the United States. They are like nuns, but married to the state, and the state, like a partner would, provides them when they need it with food, with healthcare, with safety, even with housing, with childcare support. It basically does everything a husband would do, and it's stepping in to do more and more of that while further isolating them from any form of community or relationship that would give that to them. And this is just so indicative of what the urban monoculture does, which is atomize humans, disintermediate strong communities and strong social ties that people used to rely on for help, and replace that with government and private services that will do it instead. And while if you'd asked me before I learned more if that's a problem, I'd be like, no, it's better, whatever, market competition, this parses everything apart from corrupted religions. But now, I mean, I've seen how childcare fails. I've seen how these services are not enough and they're not producing flourishing humans. And so it's very sad and toxic what's happening.
Well, and I would say my core takeaway from this, and previously I said if Trump comes into office, one thing I'd really like to help run for the department or work on for the department is helping clean up the size of government, cut it down. For Republicans to win long term, one of the most efficacious efforts they could focus on, it would be akin to the unrestricted immigration that Democrats are focused on, is getting people married.
Yeah.
It would be good for pronatalism, it would be good for the state, and it would increase their odds of winning.
Yeah, so we need to do what Tokyo's doing with that dating app, but way better, way more effective.
Well, I mean, I think that they can get back to
my gosh. There's been all these Bridgerton balls that are failed social media scams, but people keep going to them because they just want there to be the London. Really, people don't know what the London season is, but they want the London season again. They want debutante balls. They want to like find their man. And there actually have been, I think in Utah for a while, the governor actually organized big parties, I think in the governor's mansion, bringing people together, sometimes singles, but I think sometimes just old people too, whatever, like all sorts of people. But if just on a wide scale, we brought back debutante balls. You would like debut to the president, you know, and then you bow and you get a dress and you do this whole thing and you'd be on the dating market. People would freaking love that. The
Oh, they would. Yeah.
Opportunities.
I
you know.
actually think that you're right about that. Like, I hadn't considered this, but bringing back the concept of the debutante ball.
People love parties. People want to dress up for stuff, and people don't get to dress up for anything anymore.
Status and aristocracy again, but something that they can participate in. Not
well, they just having an opportunity to take photos of something and dress up for something, and get ready for something. In fact, there's even this weird Gen Alpha trend where they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so cute! You get to put on little outfits and everything." Where they're like talking about how novel and cute it is to go to an office because they just get to go and like dress up and look pretty for something. We need this. Okay, so there's my little dream.
You're gonna put on little outfits to go to the. I love this. And imagine in a few generations there might be a romanticization of the days when people worked from offices. Where people
and like power lunched and stuff. Like, oh my gosh, how cute! Like this.
Oh my gosh, how quaint and historic!
When people could afford to eat at restaurants, and I mean, it just But I feel like things like that are so underrated, and they'd be so inexpensive to execute, and yet it's wasted. All these governors' mansions, the White House, all these event spaces are wasted and now used for stupid Salesforce gatherings. You know, it's just so sad that they're all just for corporate retreats now and marketing events when they could be for bringing people together. That's what these old spaces were originally meant for. Ballrooms. When are ballrooms used for balls anymore, right? I was thinking about this the other day when we were looking at hotel ballrooms in various like spaces and walking around, and I was like, there are no balls anymore. Why are you calling it a ballroom? Like, call it an event space. Give up. Stop. You're embarrassing yourself. This is sad.
Well, at Hereticon, remember we were at like the nicest like club thing. It was insane, you know.
No, it was like a museum. It was like a Bond film party.
No, it was like
there were ambient dancers
where they had like people on stilts and like skimpy outfits and everything,
and feathers,
and,
like just waving their arms and
yes, and I walked around and they had like, you know, like figures holding like glowing orbs and stuff, and like multiple areas where you could like look at other people dancing from like upstairs and everything. It was wild. But I also thought it was interesting how much I took in of this is I am so appreciative that this is not my life, that I am not in this like daily Silicon Valley aristocracy, which I was for a while. And they do parties like this constantly. Do you remember back in like Silicon Valley when we had to go to like all of the VC parties and stuff like that because we were like raising, and it's like a thing.
It's a thing, yeah.
And I think that it's just important to like gut check. And I feel so bad that so many people don't get the opportunity to do this. How much you would actually be unhappy if you were living this like whatever lifestyle.
I think it could be fun if it were about finding a partner. Because then it's only relationship energy, it's romance, it's planning with your friends, it's thinking about what your future could be.
Which is funny because at Hereticon, you and I think we're friends, like good friends with all of the most eligible single girls, and like we're trying to find them partners and like striking out.
Yeah. Well, guys' expectations are unreasonable. And that's one of the biggest issues. And it's also really hard to find guys who are good enough for high achieving women. But that's something we've beaten on until it's...
Or willing to settle. High achieving guys just aren't willing to settle.
No, not at all. Yeah. So they're going to live alone forever.
I love you to death, Simone.
Love you too.
My absolute
I gotta show
princess.
you. She has fallen asleep, and it is really cute. She's just out.
Oh, she was freaking out before.
Well, she always gets a little fussy before she falls asleep, but then once she's out, she's out. So I love you.
You're amazing.
Oh. Oh yeah, that's your speech?
Yes, come on.
That's okay. You want to measure me? Am I tall enough?
Come closer to me.
You've got chocolate all over your face. Am I tall enough?
Yes, you're too tall.
I'm too tall. Okay.
Yes, or you